When Morris Carver signed the visitor log at Eastfield High at 7:40 on a cold Monday morning, the principal looked at his lanyard before she looked at his face and decided in half a second that he didn't matter. He had on a brown cardigan, readers pushed up on his forehead, and a substitute's temporary badge clipped crooked to his shirt. He looked like a tired older man picking up a day's work. 3 championship rings in a safe a long way off. A net worth that didn't fit on a single line, and an education foundation. The Della Carver promise that quietly kept the lights on at 3 dozen schools exactly like this one, including the one he was standing in. Which was the whole reason he was standing in it. A flag had come up at Eastfield, kids disappearing off the rolls. So he'd done what he always did when he needed the truth instead of a report. He'd put on somebody else's job and gone to see for himself. "You're the sub for Brennan's room," Principal Adele Vaughn said, not quite to him. "Try to keep them in their seats. Don't expect much." She was already turning away, already talking to an assistant. "And tell the office the Jalen Beck situation is closed. Hearings at 2. He's out. I'm not carrying a kid who sleeps in my boiler room and skips the state test through another quarter. He'll sink our numbers, and the state's already breathing down my neck." Matsantanida, a son, a boy. Discussed like a line item in a hallway before the first bell. And Maurice Carver clipped his badge straight, said, "Yes, ma'am," and said absolutely nothing. He took Brennan's room, and he let his eyes move, the way they always did when a building was failing a kid and didn't know he was watching. The first thing he saw was a desk near the window, 3rd row, empty, with a name taped to it. J. Beck. The second thing was the boy himself, who slid in late after the bell and put his head straight down on the desk. And Maurice clocked, in one practiced glance, that this was not a lazy kid. The work boots were a man's size, too big, laced tight, scuffed with something industrial. There was a fresh scrape across 2 knuckles. There was the faint chemical smell of a floor-stripping crew on his hoodie. And the kid's eyes, when he lifted his head, weren't defiant. They were the eyes of a man who hadn't slept in a 15-year-old's face. The third thing was the boy's backpack, half open on the floor, and inside it, not school books, but 2 juice boxes and a sleeve of crackers. Snacks sized for small children. The fourth thing was a little girl, maybe 8, who appeared at the narrow window in the classroom door, waved at the sleeping boy with her whole arm, and got waved back at without the boy even fully waking. Pure reflex, the wave of someone who does it every day. The fifth thing was the clock. The boy watched it the way Maurice's mother used to watch the number 9. Like it was the only thing standing between him and somewhere he had to be. Maurice noticed every one of them. He did not react. He felt something old turn over in his chest. Now here is the part that Principal Vaughn did not understand yet. She had looked at Jalen Beck's file. The absences, the missed test, the night a security camera caught him asleep in the boiler room. And she had read it the way a tired administrator reads a file, as a problem to be removed before it costs her the school. She had decided he was defiant, a sinker, a line item to close. She had it exactly, catastrophically backwards. And the substitute she'd told not to expect much was about to find out the truth about Jalen Beck before lunch. And the principal was about to make the single biggest mistake of her career, in front of the one person on earth who could see it for what it was. So stay with us for the whole video, because what that boy was actually carrying and what the principal was about to throw away and who the substitute teacher really was, those 3 things are going to collide at a 2 o'clock hearing in a way that nobody in that building will ever forget. Maurice Carver knew that boy. Not his name, his type. Because Morris had been him. He grew up poor in Eaton Springs, and after his little brother Isaiah died when Morris was 13, he stopped talking for the better part of a year, got big and silent and angry, and became, in the eyes of every adult at his school, a problem. A sinker. A kid the system had quietly written off before he turned 14. They saw the silence and the sighs and the rage, and they filed him under lost cause. And not one of them ever asked what had happened in that house in December. It took one man, a basketball coach who refused to read the file and insisted on reading the kid, to reach him. Maurice had spent the rest of his life knowing exactly how close he'd come to being thrown away, and exactly how thin the thing was that saved him. His mother, Della, had wanted an education more than anything in the world and never gotten one. She cleaned the houses of people with diplomas on their walls and rode the number 9 home and told her son that a mind was the one thing nobody could repossess. When she died, Maurice built his whole foundation around that. The Della Carver promise, schools and scholarships in neighborhoods like the one that almost lost him. Eastfield was one of his schools. And when the numbers said kids were vanishing off its rolls, he didn't send an auditor. He put on a cardigan, because the only way to find out how a school treats the kid in the 3rd row by the window is to be the adult standing at the front of that room. What he didn't know yet was the name of the man whose boots Jalen Beck was wearing. Adele Vaughn. Vaughn had not become a principal to throw children away. She had been, 20 years ago, the best teacher anyone at Eastfield had ever seen. The kind kids came back to visit a decade later. She'd taken the principal's job because she thought she could fix the whole building instead of one room at a time. And then the system had gone to work on her. Budget cut after budget cut, a teacher shortage that never ended. And finally, the thing that broke her, a state accountability formula that said if Eastfield's numbers didn't come up, the state would take the school over and scatter its 800 kids to the wind. So Adele Vaughn had started doing math no educator should ever do. She'd started triaging children, protecting the graduation rate, the test scores, the survival of the school, by quietly easing out the handful of kids whose numbers dragged the rest down. The absent ones, the failing ones, the ones with the thick files. She told herself she was sacrificing a few to save 800. She told herself it was leadership. She had stopped, somewhere in the last few years, seeing faces, and started seeing data points, because data points don't keep you up at night the way a boy's face does. She wasn't a villain. She was a good teacher whom a brutal system had slowly turned into an accountant of children. And Jalen Beck was, on her spreadsheet, a number she needed gone by 2 o'clock. 6th period. Maurice gave the class a writing assignment off the top of his head. 1 page, he said. Write about something you carry that nobody can see. Most of them groaned and wrote 3 sentences. Jalen Beck, half asleep, picked up a pencil and wrote for 40 minutes without stopping. And when Maurice collected the papers and read that one in the back of the room during his prep, the building seemed to go quiet around him. The kid could write. Spare, true, devastating sentences. Better than anything Maurice had read from a 15-year-old in his life. And between the lines of it, the whole truth came out. Jalen wrote about a house, about being the one who keeps the lights in it. He wrote, without once asking for sympathy, about a father who died 2 years ago and the boots he'd left behind, and about being too small for them then, and just big enough now. Mr. Sassan. Brennan, the regular teacher, out sick that day, the one whose room Maurice was covering, had left a note in her desk drawer that Maurice found later. Jalen Beck is the most gifted writer in this school. Admin won't listen. Please don't let them lose him. She'd been fighting for the boy, alone for a year. Mr. Sims, the custodian who'd worked Eastfield for 30 years and watched 4 principals come and go, had been the one quietly leaving the boiler room door unlocked on the coldest nights and saying nothing to anybody. Because here's what Maurice pieced together by 2 o'clock from the essay and Brennan's note and 10 minutes of gentle questions. Jalen Beck's father had died 2 years ago. His mother, Pam, worked 2 jobs to hold them together, and 3 weeks ago, she'd collapsed and been hospitalized, leaving a 15-year-old as the only adult in a house with an 8-year-old sister and a 6-year-old brother. So Jalen got his siblings up, fed, and to school, worked an overnight floor stripping job for cash, came to first period on no sleep, and the morning the school heat at home got shut off for non-payment, he'd brought the little ones to a neighbor and slept 2 hours in the only warm building he had a key to in his heart, his school. He'd missed the state test because that was the morning his mother was admitted. The absences, the boiler room, the sleeping in class, every single mark in the thick file the principal was about to expel him over was, read correctly, an act of a child holding up a family alone. And before you find out what happened at that 2 o'clock hearing, you need to understand that the substitute in the brown cardigan had been exactly this boy, 35 years ago, and had survived only because one adult refused to read the file. Nobody in that hearing room knew it yet. The clock ticked toward 2. The whole building held its breath. At 2 o'clock, in a small office, Principal Vaughn slid the expulsion paperwork across the table and asked Jalen Beck if he had anything to say for himself. The boy looked at the floor. His father's voice was in his head. The last thing Reuben Beck ever told his son, from a hospital bed 2 years ago. Take care of them, Jay. And don't you ever make a sound about it. So Jalen did what he'd done for 2 years. He held the line. He said nothing. He was going to let them expel him without a word of defense, because a sound felt like folding, and his daddy had told him not to fold. And the substitute teacher, who had no business being in that room, stood up anyway. Before you sign that, Maurice said quietly, ask him one question you never asked. Ask him why he was in the boiler room. Ask him where his mother is. Ask him who's getting his little brother and sister to school every morning. He set Jalen's essay on the table. Or read one page of the best writing in your building by the kid you just called a sinker. Principal Vaughn's face began to change, floor by floor, like a building losing its lights. He's not defiant, Maurice said. He's the most responsible person in this school. His father died 2 years ago. His mother's in the hospital right now. He works nights so an 8-year-old and a 6-year-old can eat. And he comes to your school exhausted because it's the one place he still believes in. He looked at the boy. Jalen, why didn't you tell a single teacher what was happening at home? Jalen shrugged, the smallest motion, and said the 2 words that would gut every adult in that room. Nobody asked. There it was. The convergence the whole building had been sitting inside without seeing it. The problem student in the thick file and the boy, quietly carrying an entire family on a child's shoulders, were the same person, and not one adult at Eastfield had ever connected the 2, because they'd all read the record instead of asking the question. The principal hadn't been removing a sinker to save her school. She'd been about to throw away the bravest kid in it. And then Maurice took off the temporary badge, and he told her who he was, the man whose foundation kept Eastfield's lights on, standing in her building in a cardigan, having watched her nearly expel exactly the kind of child his entire life's work existed to protect. The principal had made a great many decisions that morning. The one she'd most regret was the way she'd looked at his lanyard instead of his face, and the way she'd looked at a file instead of a boy. Here is what he did. And it was not what Adele Vaughn braced for. He did not fire her, or pull his funding, or humiliate her in front of her staff. He'd heard her story too. "You used to be the best teacher in this district," he said. "Then a broken system handed you a calculator and told you to ration children, and you did it because you were trying to save the rest. I'm not going to punish you for drowning. I'm going to throw you a rope." The promise would fund Eastfield deep enough that she'd never have to triage a single kid again. Counselors, a food program, the support that should have caught Jalen in September. "Be who you were before they broke you," he told her. "I just handed you back the means." He turned to the boy. "Your daddy was right that you should carry them. He was dead wrong about one thing." He put a hand on Jalen's shoulder. "Strong men make a sound. That's the whole point of being strong. You make a noise so the rest of us know to come running. You've been holding the line alone for 2 years. You're done holding it alone." He got Pam Beck the medical care she needed and the house's heat back on by nightfall. He set up the family so a 15-year-old could go back to being 15 with his siblings safe and provided for. He made Ms. Brennan, who'd fought for Jalen alone for a year, the head of a new writing program, and saw to it that Jalen Beck, the best writer in the building, had a clear road all the way through college. And he shook Mr. Sims's hand for every cold night he'd left a door unlocked and said nothing. Reuben Beck had told his son to take care of them and not make a sound. His boy had done it for 2 years until it nearly cost him everything. Strong men make a sound. Somebody finally heard him, and somebody should hear you. So look at what one substitute in a brown cardigan uncovered. A principal who'd been turned into an accountant of children, handed back the means to be a teacher again. A custodian who left a door unlocked on cold nights, finally thanked out loud. An English teacher who fought for one kid alone for a year, who got an army. A mother who got her health and her home back. 2 little kids who got their brother back as a brother instead of a parent. And a 15-year-old who'd been written off as a sinker, who turned out to be the strongest person in the building, and who got to put the boots down for a while and just be a kid. He said it in 2 words, looking at the floor, when somebody finally bothered to ask. Nobody asked. That's the whole story, isn't it? The most important question we never asked the kid in the back row. So ask it, and so should you. If you were ever the kid in the back row that the world wrote off without asking why, drop a comment and tell us where you're watching from. We read every single one. If this story moved you, hit that like button, because it helps stories about the kids we almost lose reach the people who need them. And if you believe we should ask the question before we read the file, subscribe and join this community. There are more of us than you'd think. And we ask. Your next story is already waiting on your screen. We will see you there.